welcome to Sarah's Stamping Treat. Today I'm going to be showing you 3 really opulent ways to use your embossing folders. And to do that I'm going to be using this Holiday Floral Swag embossing folder from Spellbinders. I hope that you can see on there that it's got this lovely bow, and then it's got kind of all your kind of Christmassy foliage all round, and then there's a space here where you could put your sentiment, or you could do all sorts of things with it. So the first technique we're going to do today is an inking technique, and I'm sure you've probably seen the inking technique before, but stick around to see how I'm going to really make that pop afterwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ink up my embossing folder with my VersaMark ink. So I'm going to pop that all over. And I've cut my paper. I'm actually using some Crafter's Companion watercolor paper because it's quite a smooth watercolor paper. So I'm going to pop that in here, and I've cut it as the same size as the embossing folder, which is 8.5 by 5.5 inches. It's a really big embossing folder. So I'm going to pop that through my die cutting machine. So look how beautifully that has embossed. It's got a really nice deep emboss to it. And then I'm going to pop down this piece of scrap paper to catch all my embossing powder, and I'm going to pour. I've got this antique gold crisp embossing powder from Altenew, and I'm going to pour that all the way over this. Now I'm just going to grab a paintbrush and just take the excess just off the areas I don't want it. So I'm going to pour all this back into the pot, and then I'm going to melt this. So then we've got this really cool shiny background. And the reason that I cut it to the size of my embossing folder rather than the size of my card is that then it gives me room to cut off bits like this that didn't work out so well. So I'm going to cut it down because I'm going to make a 5x7 card. So I'm going to cut it down to just a smidge under 5x7. And so I'm going to cut off some of these bits that didn't work quite so well. So then we've got that. And if you want a kind of more clean and simple look, you could absolutely just stick that to your card blank like this. Add your sentiment, and that would be a really lovely card as it is, but we're going to take it up one more level. So I'm going to use my Altenew watercolours. I've just got the 12 pan pair, and it comes with this lovely water brush as well. It's a nice fine one. I'm going to paint the pattern made by the embossing folder. I'm just turning the paper around a bit as I paint, because I don't want to get my hands in it. I mean, realistically, I probably should have started at the top and then painted down, but hey. And it's quite nice because it makes it quite easy to paint with the embossing powder there, because it kind of almost resists the paint. So it doesn't really matter if you kind of go over the lines, because it's not going to go over the embossing. The embossing kind of almost pushes it back. And this is a lovely watercolour set. The colours are really rich and opulent. It's a really nice one to use. And that's kind of what I want these cards to look like. Nice and opulent and really stand out. Then you can see now we've got this beautiful gilded painted panel. So then I've used this hot foil plate set to hot foil this Merry Christmas in red onto a piece of white cardstock, and I've cut it out using the coordinating die that comes in the set. So that's Yana's Christmas Sentiments from Spellbinders. And I've done that off screen today because I don't have any plugs free, and this video is more about the embossing. But I'll link a video below if you'd like to find more out about the hot foiling. So I'm just going to pop this up. I'm going to pop that on there. And then I'm going to take my white 5x7 card base that's made of Nina Solar White 110 pound cardstock, and I'm going to glue this on. So then there's our finished card. You can see it's got loads of dimension and it looks really shiny. The other thing just to note is that you'll see that this is slightly mottled across here. If you don't want that effect, you need to use a smoother cardstock, but I use this watercolor cardstock so that it would take my watercolor paint. But you could always use a cardstock suitable for markers and use that, and then you'll get a less textured look across here. Then for my next card, I've got a 5x5 navy blue card blank, and I've got a piece of navy cardstock that is 4 7/8 inches square just to go on top of there. And I'm going to pop this through my machine in here so that you just kind of get this bit on the bottom. But before I do that, I want to put a sentiment in here. So I just wanted to see where my sentiment needs to go. It needs to go up here in this corner. So I'm going to use this Merry Christmas hot foil plate. It's the same one that I used on the last card. And I'm using gold foil this time. I used red foil on the last card. So I'm just going to take that in place. And then I'm just pulling this down to see if it is where I want it. Because then I can see it kind of compared to the embossing folder. I think I want it slightly further down, so let's move that down a little. I think hopefully that should look nice there, so I'm just going to go and hot foil that then. So then we can remove this. And we've got this beautiful gold sentiment. So then I'm going to put this through my machine in my embossing folder. And then I want to add some gold to the embossing. And there's a few ways that you can do that. I was originally going to add some VersaMark ink and heat emboss it, but I've actually decided to use this metallic titanium gold acrylic paint. So I'm just going to squeeze some onto this piece of paper. And then I'm just going to use my paintbrushes just to paint it onto the image. And there's part of me that's tempted just to leave it like that, because I think that actually looks really pretty, just with the embossing on the rest of it and then just the bow painted. And I think actually that is where I'll leave it. I've kind of been going back and forward in my head as to whether I want to paint it all. I think I quite like it as it is. I think it's quite a nice kind of clean and simple design. And I'm going to add a few little gems just to lift it a little bit. So I've got some smaller and larger gems, and I'm just going to add them to my picture. So then I'm just going to glue this onto my card front. So then there's that card finished. So then for my final card, I've got this Evening Evergreen 5x5 card blank, and I want to create an aperture. So I've got This die from the Essential Circles dies from Spellbinders, so that's the second biggest of the plain cutting dies. You can see it's also got these detail dies in there as well, but it's the second biggest of the plain cutting dies. And then I've also got this, so this is from the Hot Foil Plates Essential Glimmer Circles, and this fits nicely round this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out of the middle of here, and then I'm going to hot foil this on round the outside. And then I've used that same Merry Christmas to just add a sentiment to the inside as well that will show through the aperture. So then I've painted this piece of paper. So this is the same watercolour cardstock I used for the first card. I've painted it with the same watercolours, and I've just added a tiny bit of the gold paint that I used on the last card as well. But this one I want to cut up, and I want to use the elements on my card. So then I'm actually just going to touch up the edges of these bits that I've cut out with my paints, so I don't have white edges. I can't really decide whether it'd be easier to cut them out first, or whether it's actually easier just to do it the way that I've done it. So I think kind of it's down to the individual really what you find easier, because I think it's easier to paint when it's a big thing, but then you do have to touch it up afterwards if you want to get rid of the white edges. I mean, you could just leave the white edges if you like that look, but I wanted mine to be a little bit tidier. I think I actually just like it with the blue and not the green. So I'm just going to chop that bit off, and maybe take this big leaf off here because it's getting in the way a little bit. And then maybe I can add that in at the bottom of here to make them a bit more balanced. So let's glue those on a second. And then I'm going to add the bow on with frame kits. So then how cute does that look? So let's bring the other ones in. So these are our 3 finished cards. They've all got really different looks. We've got this kind of quite bright one, this one where we've just used elements, and this one that's more subtle. But you can see that using the embossing folder has just really added a level of texture to the cards, as opposed to kind of stamping or any of the techniques we'd usually use for these kind of effects. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, I'd appreciate you clicking like below, and you can also press subscribe if you'd like to see future videos. All of the products that I've used for today's video are listed in the description below, and there's also a link there to my blog where you can find a picture supply list if that makes it easier to find what you're looking for. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you again soon.